Okay, MLA Trivers.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you for this excellent presentation. It's been very informative, and thank you for all the great questions, too. I learned a lot from them, and you asked a lot of my questions. One of the things I hear about is people look at the high cost. You mentioned, $181 per day. And then you've also talked about this fine line between being assessed level 4 and 5 versus level 1, 2, 3. And they say, I would like to keep my level 1 in my own home. They can't stay in their home, but I could build an in-law suite on. And they say, is there any help for that? How does that work? And you've talked a lot about home care. Is there help to actually set up people so they can look after people in their own home, their loved ones?
Not to my knowledge through our department. There might be through Family and Social Services and Seniors, but I'm not aware of something.
No, it's not.
Okay. Yeah.
Just did it.
Okay, I guess, again, said Brad Trivers here, I think that's something you should really take a look at. Not only would it be better for the people who need the care, but I think it could potentially save the taxpayers some dollars as well. So I wanted to make that point.
I just want to comment on that, Jamie McDonald. There is a really good model in Manitoba that follows that pathway. They're looking at now, and I think they've implemented it in some areas across the province.
Love to see that.
Yep.
I'd also add that we do have the Family and Human Services has two programs, the Seniors Home Repair Program as well as the Seniors Safe at Home Program. Those are two things that they deal with to help seniors be more safe and comfortable in their own homes.
And the next question I had, it really had to do with how you work with Family and Human Services when you do your assessments. That's another thing that I found for some constituents. They feel like they're in a tug of war. They say, I just did an assessment here and now I have to do another assessment there. Do you work together with them so that it's the same people doing the assessments, or is it a complete handoff? Like, how closely do you work with Family and Human Services, especially on assessments?
Well, to my understanding, that might be more of a question for Calvin here again, but when you're dealing with community care and the services provide supports for community care, that would be dealt with Family and Human Services, right? They're getting the assistance through there, and they can become long-term cares when we take over, and so I mean, I'm sure there's communication from one to the other, but once again, we would look at it differently. Like I say, asset issues would be different. We deal with income; they deal with overall assets, so it's the component there. I don't know if Calvin, there's more you want to add to that, or maybe Calvin come forward. Musical chairs.
Yeah. Calvin Jodry, long-term care. Your question's very appropriate, and we do get a lot of frustrated individuals that do go through combined processes, and where the rules aren't quite aligned, one's asset, one's income based, and we do use different staff. I have staff that do the assessments for long-term care. What we try to do to streamline it in our shop is we ask them to sign a paper that we can share their information with social services if they agree and they're going in for services there. We will provide our file to social services because it's, of course, their right, but we always ask that question to try to minimize it.
And that's good. I definitely would like to encourage you to continue to break down the silos, right? And have a client-focused approach to dealing with the assessments, so that the client, as far as they're concerned, they're just working with government. They don't really care if they were working with 5 different departments or 23 or whatever. So please continue to improve that process. That is something I hear from my constituents. Chair, one more question. And my phone is vibrating. I apologize, Chair. I've had this case come up a few times where I have seniors that do have mental health problems, and this is something I'm pretty sure aware of. And so they're taken out of their homes, but they don't want to be taken out of their homes. And right now they're put in a hospital setting, which we've heard today is extremely expensive and is a very poor place for them to be. But right now, apparently, the way I understand it, the legislation doesn't allow for them to actually be put into a long-term care facility, which would be cheaper as well as much better for them, because they can't legally give their consent. And I wondered if you are working on new legislation so that this can happen, so that it's a win-win for everybody concerned, the government, the individuals, the clients, their families.
You're referring to adult protection issues? I mean, we do run into seniors that we have to remove based on they're not safe in their environment. They could be living by themselves, but due to a number of factors, are not able to provide a reasonable level of care for themselves. Also, I've seen situations where we have couples that one isn't providing the level of care that they should be, and so, but maybe Calvin.
I'm referring to the Adult Protection Act.
Oh, okay.
I mean, the way I understood it was that there's indeed the Consent for Treatment Act can't be applied in this case. There would have to be a new, Guardianship Act or something like that. And I wanted to make sure that you are pursuing that, because really it's a piece of legislation that's going to save everybody a bunch of grief and save taxpayers money too, I think, in the end.
It's Calvin Jodry. What's really happening, and I coordinate admissions for the province with the committees. What happens is there's individuals who are not capable of making decisions, who are not able to say yes to long-term care. In fact, they refuse long-term care when you ask them. They want to go home. And in those circumstances, the Consent to Treatment Act doesn't cover us to allow them to come to long-term care without their permission. If they're willing to go to long-term care and there's no resistance, we bring them into long-term care. It's when they're actively resisting that we don't have the capacity to make that choice. So the matter has been referred to our legislative specialist, is on the agenda in the department to actually take a look at. I can't give you more than that. It is in Nicola's hands.
Great to hear.